Hello from the Parenting Network. I am Mr. Deshawn, and I am a part of Team Relate, which is relationship education leading adolescents toward empowerment. And I want to welcome you to Botvin's Life Skills lesson on communication. So, yes, today we're going to take some time and we're going to talk about communicating effectively. We're going to talk about how do we make sure that the messages and the things that we're saying to someone can be heard, and how are we listening to those messages from someone else? Today's lesson is going to ask you to participate a little bit. So I'm going to ask you right now to grab a couple sheets of paper. It can be lined paper, it could be blank paper. It's just going to help you participate a little more fully in this conversation. And we have two friends that want to say hi to you, say hello. And at this moment, if you would be so kind as to pause, grab those sheets of paper and come back and we will continue. Thank you for grabbing those sheets of paper. They're going to prove necessary in a little bit for our dive into communication. So one thing we do want to recognize is that communication is everywhere. It's happening around us on a constant basis. And even the animals are doing it. Bears communicate, bees communicate, geese communicate, and believe it or not, our trees around us are communicating through their root system. The roots of trees are a network where messages are being sent and helping the trees decide when to start developing leaves and when the leaves should fall, if they're in places where leaves fall with the season change. That's something that we may not have known. So communication is indeed everywhere. So to get a better understanding of communication, we want to play the telephone game. Some of you may be familiar with this game because it's been played for a long time in schools and after school programs and even amongst friends. So the idea of the telephone game is to take a message and try to get it through without it being changed. Does it always work? Let's see what happens with our friends here. The first message that they have is a cat is stuck up in a tree. Should we call the fire department? Well, the person that hears the message goes to someone else and they say, some cat climbed up a tree. I wonder if he's from the fire department. The person hearing the message goes to another individual and they say, a dude is stuck up in a tree. The fire department needs to be called. That person goes to the next and they say, call the fire department now. A man got struck by a tree. And this person yells, fire! A man struck a tree, it's on fire. Somewhere, that first message transformed to the last message. I wonder, how did that happen? Well, we do know that accurate communication is important and it involves listening as well as speaking. And we know even that though technology has changed, that phones are not the same as they were, things always evolve, but the keys to effective communication remain the same. And one of the keys is understanding that communication is starting with that there's a sender. So if a person is speaking or sharing something, they are the sender and they are trying to get what they're saying to a receiver. And the receiver is receiving a message, whatever that message may be. And to better understand communication, we want to say that communication is the act of expressing oneself in such a way that one is easily and clearly understood. We do know that this does not always happen, and we're going to explore why that might be the case. Communication involves a couple of things. One of the things it involves is verbal communication. And we're going to talk about what that means in a second. And there's also nonverbal communication. Understanding verbal and nonverbal communication is important. So to understand verbal, we're talking about words we use, tone of voice, writing, audio-visual messages, and nonverbal would be gestures, postures, mannerism, facial expressions, things that we know as body language. So it's important to really understand that body language, it plays a very important part in communication. Guess what message or feeling is being communicated in this picture? Take a look at it. You guys have a good idea what they might be saying through those emojis? Well, what if this person was saying, I am confident I can do this activity? What if this person was saying, it is really fun to be at home for so long? Or this individual here, what if they're saying, I am really angry with you? My question to you is, are their faces or emojis lined up with what they're thinking or saying? See, to effectively communicate your verbal and nonverbal messages, they should be the same. If they're not, this is miscommunication. So, thinking for a moment, what kind of messages can emojis communicate? You guys have a couple of ideas? What types of messages are they not good at communicating? What might be some things that you would not necessarily want to use emojis to send and talking about how you may feel? So, with one of the sheets of paper that you have gotten, I would like you to look at any recent misunderstandings you may have had. It could be with a parent, it could be with a friend, it could be with a loved one, a guardian, it could be with a sibling. What I would like you to do is briefly describe a recent misunderstanding and who it's with. After you have done that, I would like you to think about what was the cause of this misunderstanding? And how did the other person feel when that misunderstanding was taking place? And the last thing I want you to go ahead and write on that piece of paper is, how could this misunderstanding have been avoided? Something to think about. And the reason we like to think about sometimes our past misunderstandings, it helps us reflect on how we can keep those type of misunderstandings from happening in the future. So that's really important. So if you want to, please pause, take some time, and just think about what was a recent misunderstanding that you had and who was it with? What was the cause of that misunderstanding? How did the other person feel? Taking into account another person's feelings are so important when it comes to communication. And how could this misunderstanding have been avoided? Well, thank you for taking some time to think about that. And we want to now look at some skills for avoiding misunderstandings. Skill development is really important because not everyone is great at communicating just naturally. Some people have to practice at it, and practice definitely makes better. And so our goal is to become better communicators. So what we have to look at are 4 sets of skills here. So one is to send the same message on both verbal and nonverbal channels. So you want to make sure that those verbal and nonverbal cues that you're sending, they're matching up. Find words that give more exact meaning. So we want to look for words that are clear, that are stating exactly what we want them to say, and that person who is hearing the message can really hear it for what it is. The next step is, or next skill, would be that the sender, if you are unsure if they heard it right, you can ask them what you said. And the receiver, if you are unsure of what they said, ask them to repeat it or state it differently. That's a very important skill to learn, is that sometimes we do want to ask, did you hear what I was saying? Or how did you hear what I was saying? And doing it in a respectful manner makes a big difference, right? So again, that body language and that tone that we use in conversation is so important. We don't think that our tone makes a difference, but if you think back to what someone may have said to you, often it's not always what they said. It might have been how they said it that had you feeling some type of way. And lastly, another skill is to paraphrase, which is to state what you heard from the sender in your own words, to make sure that you're being clear to them on what you're hearing. So you want to send a message, you want to be specific, you want to ask questions, And you want to also paraphrase what is going on. So hear, do, and see. So this is another activity. With that second piece of paper that you have, you can take it out right now. And I'm going to ask you to follow along and do this next few steps. So on that sheet of paper, I would like you to draw a large rectangle. Yep, go ahead and draw a large rectangle. After you have drawn that large rectangle, I would like you to draw a square in the corner of the rectangle. A square in the corner of the rectangle. Then I would like for you to draw a circle inside of the rectangle. Draw a circle inside of the rectangle. After you've done that, write a number in the rectangle. Yep, write a number in the rectangle. And then I would like you to please write a specific word in the rectangle. Write a specific word in the rectangle. You've done that? Awesome. So I'm going to ask you, did your picture look something like this? Chances are probably not. I'm pretty sure that each of you might have some different way that you drew the place that you drew the square, some different place you drew the circle, you picked a different number perhaps, and maybe you chose a word other than the word specific. Why did that happen? Well, one of the things maybe would be that maybe I wasn't as clear about what size of rectangle to draw. And maybe I didn't specify what corner. And I know, I didn't tell you where inside the circle to write. And I didn't tell you what number. So as you see here, you did what you were told, but you weren't given clear examples or explanations on how to do it. So if there was miscommunication, it would be on me as the sender of the initial message. So yes, I take responsibility for maybe not giving you that. Sorry. So for a practical application, what I want us to do is look at 3 situations. And in those 3 situations, I would like for us to kind of look at how or where and if there was a miscommunication and how it may be possible for it to have been different. So our first situation, we have a friend named Andrew. Andrew was meeting a friend at 7 p.m. on a Friday. Friday comes and Andrew goes to the movie theater and he's waiting on the friend. Andrew becomes impatient because the friend has not arrived for about an hour, and Andrew feels very slighted and upset that that friend has not arrived. Meanwhile, his friend is on the other side of town. And his friend is very upset because he's at a movie theater waiting on Andrew to arrive, and Andrew was inconsiderate, did not call, and just didn't bother to show up. So think for a moment, where was the miscommunication likely to have occurred? So looking at these 4 things here, hearing what I said as far as what happened, Andrew was at one movie theater, his friend is at another, they're both not understanding what happened. What could have helped this situation be better? So could it have been that they should have sent some verbal and nonverbal message? Maybe they should have repeated the message back to each other or the sender. Maybe they weren't very specific. And maybe was there a possible miscommunication of where they didn't ask questions? Listening to that story, I would think that maybe they weren't very specific and maybe they missed asking questions, and maybe they should have repeated the time and the theater that they were going to meet at, especially if there was more than one movie theater in town. So maybe we can help Andrew and ourselves have better communication when we're meeting up with a friend if we tell them and ask questions and are very specific. Now we have Melissa. Melissa has a situation where she's babysitting for a neighbor who has 3 children. As Melissa is babysitting, these three children are giving her a run for her money. So she is frustrated, she's angry, and at one point she even gets locked out of the house for about 10 minutes and it is cold outside. Melissa gets back in the house and the parents arrive. When they arrive, Melissa is smiling and laughing as she tells them what was going on and how the children were behaving. The children are now being rewarded by their parents by going to the toy store the next day. What could possibly have been some miscommunication in how Melissa was feeling and how she relayed that to the parents? Because in the story, we do see that Melissa is frustrated and she's angry, but the children are yet being rewarded. Could it have been that she did not send the same verbal and nonverbal message? Maybe she didn't get repeated back to her the message. Maybe she wasn't very specific. And maybe the parents didn't ask questions to clarify. Listening, I think that there was definitely a mix-up in her verbal and nonverbal messaging. And there definitely weren't questions from the parents as to what specifically she was asking or saying. And Melissa wasn't very specific in how she was feeling about that, right? So let's do one more. In this one, we have Carol. So Carol has a situation where she is on her team and they're about to play an important game for their season. The team isn't doing very well and this game really matters. The coach has worked really hard on a great game plan and wants to make sure every individual knows their role. So the coach meets with each person before the game, tells them their role and what the expectation is. And as Melissa's listening, she doesn't fully understand everything the coach is saying about her particular role. She doesn't ask any questions, and as the game goes on, she messes up a few times and the team loses. Well, for Carol, what can possibly have been some of the error in what was happening here? Could it have been that there was not being the same message sent verbal and non-verbally? Could it have been that there was no repeating back to the sender of what the message was? Maybe the message wasn't very specific, and maybe there wasn't the asking of questions. Well, I definitely believe, listening to the story, that maybe Carol did not repeat back the message that she was hearing. Maybe the message wasn't very specific, and I'm guessing that Carol did not ask questions during that time. Well, thank you all for really taking a moment to think and reflect on this practical application on what that could look like. So for ourselves, what are some situations, what are some events that we've experienced in which better communication could be applied? And so going forward, we want to think about what that really looks like. What does communication really mean to us and why is it important for it to be effective? Are we listening as well as trying to get our point across? And something I find very important in communication is taking time to hear what's being said before we respond. So we're going to really want to practice that. And even asking a person in communication to, hey, could you please rephrase that? Could you please say that in a way that maybe is easier for me to understand? Those are all important things. And one recommendation I also have is sometimes when people are talking to you, take about 5 seconds before you respond. Because if you're really taking those 5 seconds, you're hearing what's being said, and then you can respond to what's being said because you actually listened to it. And you weren't so anxious to get your point across that you really ignored what was being said before, right? Sometimes we do that. So thanks for learning about communication. Thanks for taking the time and understanding that communication is everywhere. And it's very important that we just take time to get better at it because practice makes better. And I thank you all for listening and paying attention. Talk to you soon.